As he prepared to sign a bill at Ellis Island, President Lyndon B. Johnson gave a short speech to those that had come to witness the signing.
This bill that we will sign today is not a revolutionary bill. It does not affect the lives of millions. It will not reshape the structure of our daily lives or really add importantly to either our wealth or our power.
He could not have been further from the truth. The bill he signed was the Hart-Celler Immigration Bill, also known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. This act marked a turning point in American immigration policy and would have a tremendous impact on America as a whole. 1882 marked the first time that immigration was restricted based on ethnicity. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 prevented Chinese laborers from immigrating to the U.S. Following this act, a number of other immigration laws were passed to restrict immigration.
In the early 20th century, we had very high levels of immigration, sometimes more than 1 million a year. And it was those high levels of immigration, mostly at that time from Southern and Eastern Europe, that prompted policymakers by 1921 and 1924 to put into place the National Origins Quota System.
The Immigration Act of 1924, or the National Origins Act, stated that the number of people from a certain country that could immigrate to the U.S. annually was to be 2% of that same nationality of foreign-born residents in the U.S. in 1890. In 1952, the immigration system was modified again by the McCarran-Walter Act. Under this act, European immigrants were given a yearly quota of 149,667 people, while Asian and African immigrants faced quotas of 2,990 and 1,400 people, respectively.
From almost the beginning of the United States, there's been an argument by some that the new immigrants are different from the older immigrants. You can't be against immigration in principle in the United States because everyone is an immigrant. Everyone is themselves an immigrant or descendants of immigrants.
In the 1960s, however, there was growing evidence of a shift away from the previous stance on immigration. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy spoke before a committee on Italian migration about the unfairness of the national origins formula.
There are still a good many brothers and sisters of American citizens who are unable to get here, who may have preferences as members of families, but because of the maldistribution of quotas, which has become nearly intolerable.
Shortly after Kennedy's assassination, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was proposed by Representative Emanuel Celler and co-sponsored by Senator Philip Hart. Representative Celler, himself the grandson of immigrants and a strong opponent of the 1924 Immigration Act, had once said that one of the things he cared about passionately was immigration law, and he thought that the bill would help to end discrimination due to place of birth. As with all major legislation, the bill had its opponents.
People who opposed the immigration policy of 1965 to a good extent wanted to keep the ethnic makeup of America consistent and without any drastic changes.
But the act was not intended to change American demographics.
The policymakers moved ahead with pretty defined goals: to end the national origins quota system and to put in place a system of family reunification. But they missed parts of the story that would become important elements of this policy in the years ahead. For instance, they did not foresee the demographic trends that were just beginning to take shape.
The Hart-Celler bill passed, and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law at the foot of the Statue of Liberty on October 3, 1965. The passage of the Hart-Celler bill was a watershed event in that the act was radically different compared to its predecessors. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, immigration from the Eastern Hemisphere had a total quota of 170,000, with no more than 20,000 per country. Immigration from the Western Hemisphere was limited to 120,000, with no national quotas at all. The new system gave preference to immigrants with family ties with those in the U.S., and also to highly skilled immigrants such as scientists.
By 1964, 1965, led by the example of the African American civil rights movement, the majority of the government came to the conclusion that it's time to get rid of racial discrimination and do everything on a race-neutral basis.
The immediate result of the new system was a drastic change in the size and composition of incoming immigrants. The passage of the Hart-Celler Act increased overall immigration. The backgrounds of the immigrants entering the U.S. changed as well. In 1900, Asians made up about 1.2% of immigrants, but by 1990 that number had changed to about 25%. Hispanic immigration over the same time period changed from 1.3% to 43% of total immigration to the U.S. Meanwhile, European immigrants as a percentage of total immigration decreased from 83% to 22%. The overall increase in immigration levels did change American demographics, contrary to the predictions of lawmakers at the time. Between 2000 and 2010, new immigrant arrivals and immigrant children accounted for 80% of population growth, and much of this has to do not only with increased immigration numbers, but also higher fertility rates among immigrants. The percentage of foreign-borns in the U.S. was 6.9% in 1950, but rose to 12.9% by 2010 as a result of the new policies. Racial minorities accounted for the majority of U.S. births in 2010, according to that year's census data. And some demographers say that non-Hispanic whites could become a minority by the middle of the century.
A number of people have described that phenomenon as contributing to the browning of America, where we began to see higher patterns and trends in immigration from other parts of the world other than Europe.
The demographical change that the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 caused has had drastic implications for American politics. The influence of the Hispanic voting bloc has become ever more apparent, especially in the 2012 presidential election, where more than 70% of Hispanics voted for the Democratic candidate, Barack Obama. Similarly, the Asian American voting bloc has emerged. During the 2008 presidential election, Senator Obama pledged, among other things, to prioritize the fight against anti-Asian discriminatory practices in the workplace. During the 2008 election, Obama garnered between 60 and 70% of the Asian American vote, and in the 2012 election, that proportion increased to over 70%. By giving preference to highly skilled workers, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 has also made an impact by bringing in professionals that are in high demand.
It's made it more possible through the quota system to bring the professionals and people who have employment attributes that are important to the United States to be able to immigrate.
As a result of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, more than half of all engineering PhDs in the U.S. are foreign-born. Immigrants, who make up less than 15% of the total U.S. population, are responsible for starting more than half of Silicon Valley's tech companies. And more than a quarter of global patents from America are filed by immigrants. Immigrants have also stepped in to fill in the United States doctor shortage. Nearly 1 in 4 physicians in the U.S. today are foreign-born and trained. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act has also done much to shape today's debate on both legal and illegal immigration. Critics of the act say that immigrants compete for jobs and depress wages. The quotas of this law, and especially its impacts on illegal immigration, are being hotly debated as Congress considers sweeping immigration reforms. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was an epic turning point in many ways, for immigration as well as for the American economy, political environment, and society. By eliminating Eurocentric quotas and establishing equal quotas for immigrants from every country, the act was an incredible leap forward for both American immigration policy and the civil rights movement. However, events in the last few decades, especially the increase in illegal immigrants, have shown that the fixed quota system of the 1965 Immigration Act fails to keep up with modern realities. Fundamental changes to immigration policy should and are being considered in order to ensure a more fair and efficient path for immigrants.